She was 19 when they laughed at her, told her to go home and knit socks while real soldiers fought the war. She was rejected 3 times, not because she couldn't fly, but because she was female, and the Soviet machine had no space for women who refused to disappear. So she forced her way in, and they gave her a plane made of wood and canvas, a relic from the previous war. No armor, no guns, no parachute, too heavy, maximum speed, slower than the cars driving on the streets below. Then they told her to fight the Nazis. One night in 1942, she flew 18 consecutive missions, 18 times into German fire. When dawn came, mechanics counted the damage. 201 bullet holes in her aircraft and 1 hole in her helmet, millimeters from her brain. She should have died that night, and on 851 other nights. But Nadezhda Popova survived all of them, became the most decorated night witch in Soviet history. And when they finally nominated her for Hero of the Soviet Union after 441 missions, they said no, not because she hadn't earned it, but because exceptional women made uncomfortable propaganda. This isn't a story about heroism. It's about the price of being extraordinary when the world demands you stay small. The first officer didn't even look up from his paperwork. No, Nadezhda Popova stood there, 19 years old, hands clenched at her sides. Outside, the summer of 1941 was burning. The Nazis had invaded 3 weeks ago. Cities were falling. Millions of men were marching toward the front. And this man, this bureaucrat with soft hands who'd never flown anything in his life, was telling her no. "I'm a qualified pilot," she said. "I have over 200 hours. Go home, girl. Knit socks for the real soldiers." He waved her away like she was an insect. Annoying, irrelevant, already forgotten before she'd even left the room. She walked out into streets plastered with propaganda posters. "The motherland calls!" they screamed. Giant women with stern faces pointing at the viewer, demanding sacrifice, demanding courage, demanding everything. Apparently, sacrifice had gender requirements. This is the story of Nadezhda Popova. But it's not the version you've read in textbooks or seen in documentaries. Not the sanitized legend about brave Soviet women pilots. This is about a girl who was rejected, humiliated, and dismissed, who then became the most decorated night witch in history by flying 852 missions in a wooden plane that shouldn't have been able to fly at all. This is about the night she flew 18 consecutive times into German fire and came back with a bullet hole in her helmet. This is about the medal they refused to give her until it became politically convenient. And this is about the 68 years after the war that she spent carrying ghosts no one wanted to acknowledge. But before we talk about the 852 missions, before we talk about the medals and the recognition that came too late, we need to talk about those 3 rejections, because that's where heroism actually begins, not in glory, in being told you're not enough and refusing to believe it. If this story is resonating with you, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's see how far around the world Nadezhda's truth has traveled. Nadezhda wasn't playing at being a pilot. She'd been flying since she was 15 years old. Real flying. Training at Soviet aero clubs where young people learned navigation, aerodynamics, emergency procedures. She could disassemble an engine and rebuild it from memory. Could land in crosswinds that made experienced pilots sweat, could navigate by stars when instruments failed. None of that mattered to the second recruitment officer. "Women aren't strong enough to handle combat aircraft," he said, not cruelly, matter of fact, like he was explaining basic physics. "I can handle. The G-forces alone would incapacitate you. It's biology. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." As if dismissing her capability based on anatomy was just neutral observation. As if the propaganda posters screaming about defending the motherland somehow didn't apply to her motherland too. She left that office, walked 3 blocks, and tried a 3rd recruitment center. The 3rd officer was different. Older, tired. He actually looked at her credentials before shaking his head. "Listen," he said. and there was something almost apologetic in his voice. Even if I wanted to approve this, which I don't, it wouldn't matter. Women don't fly combat missions. Not in any military on Earth. It's not how war works. Maybe it should be, Nadezhda said. Maybe, but I don't make policy. Neither do you. Go home. Find a factory job. Support the war effort that way. That's how you can help. 3 doors. 3 rejections. 3 variations on the same message. You are not enough because you are female, and nothing you accomplish will change that fundamental disqualification. Most people would have stopped, should have stopped, accepted reality, and found another way to contribute. The Soviet Union needed factory workers, nurses, engineers, plenty of ways to serve that didn't require fighting the entire military establishment. Nadezhda didn't stop, couldn't stop, because stopping meant accepting that they were right, that her gender mattered more than her skill, that the motherland only wanted certain kinds of sacrifice. So she did something desperate. She started writing letters to commanders, to party officials, to anyone with authority who might listen. She showed up at military airfields, trying to demonstrate her flying, got escorted out by guards who thought she was delusional, showed up at government offices with her flight logs, her certifications, proof of capability that nobody wanted to see. For 2 months, she beat her head against a wall made of institutional sexism and wartime pragmatism. For 2 months, the answer was always no, until she heard about Marina Raskova. If you don't know that name, you should. Marina Raskova was the Soviet Union's most famous female aviator, navigator, record holder, hero of the Soviet Union, one of the first women to receive the title. In 1938, she'd set a world distance record for female pilots. In 1939, she'd navigated a bomber across Siberia through conditions that killed male crews. More importantly, she had Stalin's ear. In September 1941, with German forces closing in on Moscow, with millions of Soviet men already dead or captured, Marina Raskova did something revolutionary. She went to Stalin directly and proposed creating 3 all-female aviation regiments. Not auxiliary units, not support roles, combat regiments, fighters, bombers, ground attack. Every position, pilot, navigator, mechanic, armorer, filled by women. It was insane, unprecedented. No military anywhere had done this. But Stalin was desperate. The Wehrmacht was destroying Soviet forces at catastrophic rates. Traditional strategies weren't working, and Marina Raskova had credibility no other woman possessed. Stalin said yes. The order went out in October 1941. The Soviet Air Force would establish 3 all-female regiments. Women aged 18-26 with aviation experience could apply. Nadezhda heard about it within hours, literally ran, to the nearest recruitment office, the same office that had rejected her before. Different officer this time, younger. He looked at her application with obvious skepticism. "You understand these are combat units," he said. "Real combat, not propaganda. Women will die." "Men are dying," Nadezhda said. "Why should women be exempt from defending their country?" He stared at her, trying to determine if she was brave or insane. Finally stamped her papers. "Report to Engels for training. If you survive training, maybe you'll get to fly. Most of you won't make it that far." He was trying to scare her. Warn her off. Give her one last chance to choose safety over insanity. Nadezhda took the papers and smiled. First genuine smile in months. She reported to Engels in November 1941, found herself among hundreds of other young women who'd been rejected, dismissed, told to go home. Girls who'd been knitting socks while wanting to drop bombs. Girls who had fire in their blood and rage in their hearts and something to prove. The training was designed to break them. 4 a.m. wake-ups. 18-hour days, flying ancient aircraft in winter conditions that could kill you before the enemy got the chance. And the male instructors, most of them, treated it like an experiment that would fail, made it harder deliberately, gave faulty equipment, forgot critical information, tested constantly. Some women quit, some died in training accidents, The rest got harder. Nadezhda threw herself into it with single-minded intensity, studied navigation until she could plot courses in her sleep, practiced emergency procedures until they became reflex, flew in conditions that terrified experienced pilots, because every mistake would be used as evidence against every woman who came after her. Every failure would justify the rejections. She couldn't afford to fail. By March 1942, she'd graduated, top marks in navigation and bombing, assigned to the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. Finally, she was going to fight. Then she saw her aircraft. The Polikarpov PO-2, a biplane made of plywood and canvas, designed in 1928 as a crop duster and training aircraft. Maximum speed, 94 miles per hour. For context, the German fighters chasing them could fly 350. No armor, no defensive guns, no radio, no parachutes. They were too heavy, so you left them behind to carry more bombs. The entire aircraft weighed less than the bombs a German bomber carried. It was a joke, a death sentence wrapped in wood and fabric. The mechanic saw Nadezhda's expression and laughed, dark laughter. "Welcome to the Night Witches, girl. Hope you're not attached to living." Nadezhda walked around the plane slowly, touched the canvas wings, felt how thin the fabric was, understood with perfect clarity. They weren't expected to succeed. They were expected to die in ways that would make good propaganda. Even our women fought bravely. Perfect for speeches, terrible for actually surviving. She climbed into the cockpit anyway. Her navigator was Katya Ryabova, 20 years old, former university student, quiet, competent, terrified. "Have you flown in combat before?" Katya asked. "No. Do you think we'll survive?" Nadezhda looked at the wooden frame around her, at the canvas that wouldn't stop a rifle bullet, at the engine that belonged in a museum. "No," she said honestly, "but we'll fly anyway." Their first mission was scheduled for that night. No gradual introduction, no practice runs. Just, here's your plane, here's your target. Try not to die. As the sun set, Nadezhda sat in the cockpit and thought about those 3 rejection letters, thought about the officers who'd told her women couldn't handle combat, who'd said it was biology, physics, reality. She was about to fly a wooden biplane into German anti-aircraft fire with no protection and no realistic chance of survival. And she realized they'd been right to reject her, not because she wasn't capable, but because what they were asking was impossible. They'd set up a scenario designed to fail and then blamed women for failing, but she was going to do it anyway, not because she believed she'd survive, but because someone had to prove it could be done. And if she died proving it, maybe, the next girl wouldn't get rejected 3 times. The engine coughed to life. Katya climbed in behind her, and as they taxied toward the runway, Nadezhda made herself a promise. If she died tonight, it would be doing what those 3 officers said she couldn't do. Sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to lose on their terms. The plane lifted into darkness, and Nadezhda Popova began the first of what would become 852 missions into hell. The Germans had a word for them: Nachthexen, night witches, not a term of respect, a term of fear mixed with contempt. Because when those canvas-winged biplanes glided through darkness with their engines cut, they sounded like something unnatural, like broomsticks sweeping through air, like ghosts, like something that shouldn't exist. The Germans were right. The night witches shouldn't have existed. Everything about the 588th Night Bomber Regiment defied logic. You don't send women in wooden planes against the Wehrmacht and expect results. You don't fly multiple missions per night in aircraft slower than automobiles and expect to see dawn. You don't cut your engine over enemy positions and glide in silence and expect the enemy not to hear you coming. But the night witches did it anyway, for 4 years. Every night, until the Germans started offering medals to any pilot who could shoot one down. Nadezhda's first mission launched at 10:47 p.m. on April 12, 1942. The target, a German supply depot near the Donets River. The plan, suicidal. They flew low, barely 500 meters altitude, so low that searchlights could pin you easily, so low that anti-aircraft guns didn't need sophisticated targeting, just point and shoot. But flying low was the only advantage the PO-2 had. German fighters couldn't match their slow speed without stalling. If you stayed low and slow, you might survive the fighters. The anti-aircraft guns were a different problem. Katya sat behind Nadezhda, map spread across her knees, calculating their approach by landmarks and moonlight. No instruments, no radio guidance, just dead reckoning and hope. 2 minutes to target, Katya called out. Nadezhda's hands were shaking on the controls, not from cold, though at 500 meters in April, the temperature was below freezing. From adrenaline, from terror, from the absolute certainty that the next 2 minutes would determine if she lived to see 20. Cut the engine in 30 seconds, Katya said. This was the insane part, the part that made the tactic work when it worked, and killed you instantly when it didn't. As you approached the target, you cut the engine completely. The plane became a glider, silent except for wind through canvas and wood. You'd glide toward the target in darkness, nearly invisible, nearly inaudible, until you were directly overhead. Then you'd release the bombs manually. No sophisticated systems, just levers and gravity, and the explosions would light up the ground and make you perfectly visible for approximately 5 seconds while you frantically restarted the engine and ran. If the engine restarted. It didn't always. Mark, Katya said. Nadezhda cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Just wind, just her own heartbeat hammering in her ears, just the whisper of canvas as they glided toward German positions that would kill them if they made a single mistake. Below, she could see the supply depot. Trucks, tents, tiny figures moving around fires. German soldiers who had no idea death was gliding overhead. "Ready," Katya whispered. Nadezhda pulled the release lever. 4 bombs dropped. The plane lurched upward, suddenly lighter. For one perfect moment, they were safe. Still invisible, still silent, still. The first bomb exploded, then the second, third, fourth. The ground lit up like daylight, and every German soldier below saw them clearly. A wooden biplane, right there, practically hovering. Searchlights swung toward them. 3 beams, 4, 5, converging. Nadezhda hit the ignition. Once. Nothing. Twice. The engine coughed but didn't catch. 3 times. The anti-aircraft guns opened fire. The sound was indescribable. Not the distant thunder you imagine. Close. Immediate. Shells exploding around them in rapid succession, each one a pressure wave that shook the entire aircraft. 4th attempt. The engine caught, sputtered, held. Nadezhda pushed the throttle forward and dove. Not away, down, toward the ground. Counterintuitive, insane. But searchlights tracked horizontally. If you dove straight down, you might drop below their range before they adjusted. Might. A shell exploded 10 meters to their right. The blast threw the plane sideways. Canvas tore. Wood cracked. Katya screamed something Nadezhda couldn't hear over the chaos. Another shell, left side this time. Closer. The plane shuddered violently. Something hot grazed Nadezhda's arm. Shrapnel or burning debris. She didn't know, and didn't have time to check. They were 200 meters from the ground. 150. 100. Too low. Dangerously low. But the searchlights had lost them in the smoke and darkness. Nadezhda pulled up hard. The wooden frame groaned. The wings strained. For one terrible second, she thought the plane would simply come apart. It held, barely. They leveled out at 400 meters. Behind them, the supply depot was burning. Ahead, darkness and the long flight back to base. Katya was breathing hard, hyperventilating. "Are we alive? Tell me we're alive." Nadezhda checked the controls. Everything still responded. The engine was running rough, but running. They had holes in the canvas. She could feel the wind coming through. But the plane was still flying. "We're alive," she said, and was surprised to hear her own voice. Steady, calm, completely disconnected from the terror still flooding her system. They landed at 12:15 a.m., 1 hour and 28 minutes after takeoff. It felt like years. The mechanics ran to the plane, started counting damage. 7 holes in the canvas, 2 in the wooden frame, 1 shrapnel gouge across the engine cowling that had missed the engine itself by centimeters. "You're lucky," a mechanic said. Lucky. That was the word they'd use for the next 4 years. Lucky. Every time you survived what should have killed you. Lucky. As if survival was random chance instead of skill and desperation, and refusing to die when death was the logical outcome. The squadron commander appeared. Major Yevdokia Bershanskaya, veteran pilot, hard as iron. She looked at Nadezhda and Katya, looked at the damaged plane, looked at her watch. "Rearm and refuel," she said. "You fly again in 40 minutes. Katya stared. "Again? Tonight? We fly until dawn, or until we run out of planes. Those are the orders." This was the reality of the night witches. Male bomber crews flew 1 mission per night, sometimes 1 every other night. They had proper bombers, crews of 4 or 5, defensive guns, radios, armor. The night witches flew 3, 4, 5 missions every single night in wooden biplanes with no protection, because each plane carried so few bombs that 1 mission accomplished nothing. You had to hit the same targets repeatedly, relentlessly, all night long. It wasn't a bombing strategy. It was harassment, psychological warfare. The Germans couldn't sleep, couldn't relax, couldn't predict when the next attack would come. Just constant, random explosions throughout the night from planes they could barely see and couldn't easily shoot down. It worked. The Wehrmacht developed genuine fear of the night witches, but it worked at a cost. Second mission, 1:05 a.m., same target area. The Germans were expecting them now. Searchlights already sweeping the sky, anti-aircraft guns on high alert. They flew anyway, cut the engine, glided in, dropped bombs, ran, took more damage, came back. Third mission, 2:30 a.m. Katya was vomiting between flights now. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from exhaustion, from adrenaline crash and respike every 90 minutes. Nadezhda felt nothing. Some switch had flipped during that first mission. The terror was still there. She could feel it, distant, like pain through heavy medication, but it wasn't controlling her anymore. She was operating on pure mechanical function. Check controls, calculate approach, cut engine, release bombs, restart, return, repeat. This was how you survived, not by being brave, by becoming a machine wrapped in skin, by disconnecting the part of your brain that processed fear and letting muscle memory fly the plane. Fourth mission, 3:45 a.m. A German fighter spotted them on approach, chased them for 8 minutes, fired repeatedly. The canvas shredded, the wooden frame splintered. They shouldn't have survived. But the Mi-109 couldn't fly slow enough, kept overshooting, kept having to circle back. And in those circles, Nadezhda dove, climbed, turned, used every meter of altitude and every knot of speed the ancient biplane could give her. The fighter finally gave up, probably low on fuel, probably convinced they weren't worth the effort. They landed at 4:20 a.m. The plane was barely recognizable, more holes than canvas. The mechanics looked at it and shook their heads. "This one's done," a mechanic said. "It's not flying again tonight." "Then give me a different plane," Nadezhda said. The mechanic stared. "You want to fly again?" "I want to sleep, but those aren't the orders." Fifth mission, 5:10 a.m. in a different PO2. This one was older. The engine rattled. The controls were loose, but it flew. The sun was starting to threaten the horizon. Night bombing only worked in darkness. In daylight, these slow canvas planes were target practice. They flew anyway. By the time Nadezhda landed after the fifth mission at 6:35 a.m., the sun was fully up. She'd been flying for 7 hours and 48 minutes. 5 missions, 5 times rolling the dice with death. She climbed out of the cockpit. Her legs didn't work properly, had to be helped down by mechanics. Katya collapsed on the ground and just lay there, staring at the sky. Major Bershanskaya approached. "Good work. Get some rest. You fly again tonight." That was it. No celebration, no acknowledgement of surviving the impossible. Just good work. You're doing it again in 16 hours. This was life in the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. This was what being a night witch meant. Flying ancient planes in impossible conditions against an enemy that wanted you dead, and a command structure that treated you as expendable. The German pilots who chased them that night reported shooting down multiple Soviet bombers, filed claims for kills, expected medals, but Nadezhda was already asleep, dreamless, exhausted beyond the capacity for nightmares. She'd survived her first night. She'd learned the fundamental truth that would carry her through 847 more missions. The planes shouldn't fly. The tactics shouldn't work. The women shouldn't survive, but they did. Because shouldn't is just another word for difficult, and difficult was all they'd ever known. August 2nd, 1942, 3 months into combat operations, Nadezhda had flown 73 missions, 73 times into fire, 73 times back. The number had stopped meaning anything. It was just counting. Keeping score in a game where the only way to win was to keep playing. The day started wrong. You could feel it. The kind of atmospheric pressure that sits heavy on your chest before a storm, except the storm wasn't weather. It was coming from the west, from German positions that were pushing hard towards Stalingrad. The briefing came at 9 p.m. Every available aircraft would fly continuous operations through the night. No breaks, no rotation. Hit German supply lines, troop concentrations, artillery positions, everything. Keep hitting them until there was nothing left to hit or nothing left to hit with. The squadron looked at each other, everyone understanding what continuous operations actually meant. It meant you flew until you died or until dawn, whichever came first. Nadezhda checked her plane, Po-2 number 312. She'd flown it for the past 2 weeks. Knew its quirks. The way the left aileron stuck slightly, the way the engine missed every third ignition cycle when cold, the way the throttle had to be pulled back exactly 3 centimeters or it would flood. Knowing your plane's quirks kept you alive. Usually, her navigator tonight was Katya, same Katya from the first mission. They'd flown together 47 times now, had developed the silent communication that comes from shared trauma. Katya would tap Nadezhda's shoulder twice when approaching target, 3 times if fighters were spotted, once if she thought they were about to die. That last one happened more often than you'd think. They loaded the bombs, 4 FAB-50s, 50 kilograms each, 200 kilograms total payload. Laughable compared to what German bombers carried. But when you flew it 5 times a night, every night, it added up. 22:15. First takeoff. The target was a German supply depot 8 kilometers behind the front line. Easy approach, light defenses. A warm-up mission before the real work began. They flew low, as always, cut the engine at the designated point, glided in silence. The depot appeared below, neat rows of supply trucks, ammunition crates, fuel drums, everything the Wehrmacht needed to keep pushing east. Bombs away. The explosions lit up the night. Secondary detonations followed, fuel or ammunition cooking off. The depot disappeared in flames. Mission 1. Success. They landed at 22:58, 43 minutes. Mechanics swarmed the plane, checking for damage, finding none this time. Reloading bombs, refueling. 5 minutes, the crew chief said. 5 minutes to piss, drink water, force down some bread that tasted like sawdust. 5 minutes for your hands to stop shaking before you climbed back in and did it again. 23:20. Second takeoff. Same region, different target. German artillery position. These were more dangerous. Artillery crews knew to expect night bombers, had searchlights, anti-aircraft guns already positioned for air defense. They approached from the north instead of west, trying to surprise them. It half worked. The searchlights found them 30 seconds before bomb release. 3 beams converging. Nadezhda was pinned, completely visible. The anti-aircraft guns opened up immediately. She released early, dove hard. The shells followed them down. One exploded close enough that shrapnel punched through the canvas, through the cockpit, between Nadezhda's left arm and her body. So close she felt the heat. Katya screamed, not words, just sound. But they were alive, falling, engine restarted. leveling out. Mission 2, success, barely. They landed at World 17 just past midnight, already into August 3rd. The mechanics found 12 holes in the canvas, one in the wooden frame, nothing critical, still flyable. "You're bleeding," Katya said. Nadezhda looked down. Her left sleeve was torn, blood seeping through, not shrapnel. The fabric had torn and the rough edge had cut her. Superficial. "I'm fine." "You're not." "I'm fine because you didn't stop for minor injuries. You stopped when you couldn't fly anymore. Until then, you flew." 0105, third mission. The fatigue was setting in now, the adrenaline from the first 2 missions fading into something worse. The shaking that comes after fear, the exhaustion that makes your reactions slow. This target was a German field headquarters, more important than supplies or artillery. Command and control, officers, communications, also more heavily defended. They approached from the south, cut engine at 1 kilometer out, glided silently toward a fighter, Messerschmitt Bf 109, silhouetted against the moon, hunting. Nadezhda saw it the same moment it saw them. The fighter banked hard, coming around for an attack run. In a normal aircraft you'd run. Maximum power, evasive maneuvers, radio for help. In a Po-2 you had one option: be so slow the fighter couldn't match your speed without stalling. Nadezhda pulled the throttle back, slowed to 90 kilometers per hour, just above stall speed for the biplane, suicide speed for the Mi-109. The fighter came in fast, too fast, overshot. Nadezhda banked right. The fighter circled, came back, overshot again. This happened 4 more times. Each time, the German pilot got closer. Each time, Nadezhda slowed more, flying on the edge of stalling. One wrong move and they'd drop from the sky. Finally, the fighter gave up, probably low on fuel, probably frustrated, probably reporting back that the night witches were impossible to kill because they flew like drunk birds. But now they'd lost position, had to abort the bombing run, circle back, reapproach, which meant German forces below were fully alert now, waiting. They came in anyway, released bombs into a storm of anti-aircraft fire, turned, ran, took more hits. The engine started smoking, landed at 0230. The engine died the moment they touched ground. 5 more seconds of flight, and they'd have crashed. "This plane's done," the mechanic said. "Engines destroyed." "Then give me another one," Nadezhda said. "You should rest. Give me another plane." Because stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant feeling. Feeling meant processing everything that had just happened. Better to keep moving. Mission 4, 0310. New plane. Same old terror. Mission 5, 0425. Katya was crying silently between missions now. Not from fear, from exhaustion so complete it bypassed emotion and went straight to physical breakdown. Mission 6, 0540. The sun was coming up. They shouldn't be flying. Night bombers in daylight were dead bombers. They flew anyway. Mission 7, 0655. Full daylight now. Every German gun could see them clearly, track them easily. They were flying coffins and everyone knew it. Mission 8, 0810. 9 hours of continuous flying. Nadezhda couldn't feel her hands anymore, couldn't feel her feet on the rudder pedals. Flying on pure muscle memory, on instinct, on something beyond conscious thought. Katya had stopped speaking, just pointed at coordinates on the map, too tired to form words. Mission 9, 0920, 10, 10:05, 11, 10:35. The plane was disintegrating, not metaphorically, literally falling apart. Holes everywhere, canvas hanging in strips, wooden frame cracking under stress it was never designed to handle. 12, 11:15, 13, 11:50. Nadezhda was no longer human, couldn't be human. Humans feel fear, feel exhaustion, feel the desperate need to stop. She felt nothing, was nothing, just a function, a process. Check controls, approach target, cut engine, release bombs, restart, return, repeat. 14, 12:30, 15, 13:05. 16, 13:40. They'd been flying for 15 and a half hours. 15 and a half hours of rolling dice with death, of flying through fire, of surviving what shouldn't be survivable. Katya was beyond exhaustion, beyond fear, beyond anything recognizable as human emotion, just existing, just completing the next task, because completing tasks was all that remained. Mission 17, 14:20, one more. The command came down, one more mission and they could stop. One more target, one more roll of the dice. 14:55. They took off for the 18th time. The target was a German ammunition dump, critical, heavily defended. The kind of target you'd normally send multiple aircraft against. They were sending one wooden biplane flown by two women who should have been dead hours ago. They approached, cut engine, glided in. The anti-aircraft fire was immediate, concentrated, accurate. The Germans had been tracking them all morning, knew their patterns, were waiting. Shells exploded all around them. The plane shook, jerked, pieces tearing off. Katya tapped Nadezhda's shoulder once, the "we're about to die" signal. Nadezhda released the bombs anyway. All four watched them fall, watched the ammunition dump explode in a chain reaction that lit up the afternoon sky. Then, crack, something punched through the cockpit, through the air, past Nadezhda's head, with a sound like tearing metal. Hot, sharp, final. She thought, this is it. 18 missions, not even a round number. But she was still flying, still breathing, still. "Your helmet," Katya whispered. "Nadezhda, your helmet." The engine was smoking, dying. They were losing altitude. But Nadezhda reached up, touched her helmet, felt the hole. Entry point back left, exit point front right. The bullet had passed through leather and padding, had burned a line across her scalp, had missed her skull by less than 2 centimeters. 2 centimeters between life and death, between 18 missions and becoming another statistic. They made it back, barely. The engine died on final approach. They glided in. Dead stick landing. The plane hit hard, skidded, stopped. 15:35, 17 hours and 20 minutes after first takeoff, the mechanics ran to the aircraft, stopped, stared. Someone counted the holes, gave up at 211 punctures. The plane looked like lace, like it had been through a shredder. They pulled off Nadezhda's helmet, found the hole, found the blood on her scalp where the bullet had grazed. "How?" someone whispered. "How are you alive?" Nadezhda climbed out of the cockpit. Legs gave out, fell, sat on the ground, stared at nothing. Katya was still in the plane, unmoving. They had to lift her out. She was conscious, just empty, hollowed out. Nothing left. Major Bershanskaya appeared, looked at the helmet, looked at Nadezhda, looked at the plane that shouldn't have flown 18 times but had. "Get them to medical," she said quietly. "Get them food, get them rest. They've done enough." But the word "enough" was meaningless, because the next night there would be more missions, more targets, more chances to die, and the night after that. And after that, 18 missions in 17 hours wasn't extraordinary. It was Tuesday. This was life as a night witch. This was the price of proving women could fight. You didn't get to fight once and rest. You fought until you died or until the war ended. No in between. Nadezhda slept for 14 hours, woke up screaming, couldn't remember the nightmare. Couldn't separate dream from memory from that grey space where both lived. The helmet sat on her bunk, the hole visible, physical proof that she'd used up her luck, that the next bullet wouldn't miss. She should have been grounded, should have been given leave, time to process, recover, remember she was human. Instead, she flew again that night, because the war didn't care about trauma, didn't care about near-death experiences, cared only that targets needed bombing and bodies needed using. Mission 92, just another number, just another night. The helmet hole became legend. Other pilots heard about it, came to see it, touched it like a talisman, proof that you could come within centimeters of death and survive. What they didn't see was Nadezhda's face when she looked at that helmet, the way her hands shook, the way she'd wake up touching her head, checking for blood that wasn't there anymore. They saw the legend. The woman who flew 18 missions in one stretch, who survived 211 bullet holes. They didn't see the cost. But the cost was always there, growing, compounding, waiting. September 1942, 1 month after the 18 missions, Nadezhda had flown 127 times, 127 separate rolls of the dice, 127 times surviving what killed others. 3 women from her squadron were dead. Irina, the one who made terrible jokes to cope with fear, had taken anti-aircraft fire through the cockpit on Mission 23. Zhenya, who wanted to be a ballerina after the war, crashed on landing when her engine failed at 50 meters. Lena, quiet, competent, careful, simply disappeared one night. No explosion, no crash site. Just gone. They held memorials, brief ceremonies between missions, stood in formation, saluted empty air, added names to a list that kept growing, then flew that night like nothing had happened, because grief was a luxury they couldn't afford. Grief meant feeling. Feeling meant breaking, and broken people couldn't fly. Nadezhda attended all 3 memorials, stood dry-eyed, said nothing, felt nothing. The numbness that had started during those 18 missions had spread, calcified, turned her into something efficient and functional and fundamentally hollow. Other pilots noticed, saw the way she volunteered for the most dangerous missions, the way she flew with precision but no caution, the way she looked at her plane before takeoff like she hoped it would be the last time. "You're going to get yourself killed," Katya said one morning after a particularly reckless approach. "We're all going to get killed," Nadezhda replied. "I'm just not pretending otherwise." That's when she met Semyon Kharlamov. He was a fighter pilot, 27 years old, stationed at the same forward airbase for resupply, veteran of Stalingrad, where he'd shot down 6 German aircraft and watched his entire squadron die around him. When Nadezhda first saw him, the first thing she noticed was his eyes. Empty, haunted, familiar. The eyes of someone who'd already died inside, but whose body kept functioning out of habit. They met in the mess hall. Nadezhda was sitting alone. She always sat alone now, forcing down food that tasted like ash. He sat down across from her without asking. "You're one of the night witches," he said. Not a question. "You're a fighter pilot," she replied. Same tone, flat, factual. They sat in silence for 5 minutes. Other pilots around them talking, laughing, maintaining the fiction that they were still human, still capable of normal interaction. Finally, Semyon spoke. "How many missions?" 127. He absorbed that. "They rotate us out after 100. Said anything beyond that breaks people." "They don't rotate us out," Nadezhda said. "We fly until we die." "That's insane." "Yes." More silence. Then Semyon asked the question she'd been asking herself for weeks. "Are you trying to die?" Nadezhda looked at him. Really looked. Saw someone who understood, who'd gone to the same empty place she had, who knew what it was like to survive when survival felt like punishment. "No," she said. "I'm trying to feel something, anything, fear, relief, joy. I fly into fire and feel nothing. I survive and feel nothing. People die around me and I feel nothing. So I keep flying, keep pushing, trying to find the edge where emotion comes back. Haven't found it yet." Semyon nodded slowly. "I thought I was the only one." "You're not." That was the beginning. 2 broken people recognizing each other, understanding that the numbness wasn't cowardice or coldness. It was how you survived trauma too large to process. You shut down everything, became mechanical, functional, dead inside but still moving. They started seeking each other out, between missions, during meals, in those brief windows when the war paused long enough to let them breathe. And slowly, so slowly neither noticed at first, something changed. Semyon told her he'd wanted to be a literature teacher, had studied Pushkin, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, had dreamed of a quiet classroom where he could share poetry with students who cared. Now I kill people, he said, instead of educating them. Nadezhda told him she'd wanted to be a civil engineer, build bridges, infrastructure that would last generations. Now I destroy bridges, she said. They laughed. Dark, bitter laughter that hurt, but it was laughter. Emotion. Something breaking through the numbness. More conversations followed. About before the war. About who they'd been when they still knew how to be people. About small things. Favorite books. Childhood memories. Dreams that felt impossibly distant now. And somewhere in those conversations, Nadezhda started feeling again. Not completely. Not the full range of human emotion, but something. Enough to remember that underneath the machine, there was still a person. Damaged, barely functional, but alive. Semyon felt it too. Stopped volunteering for suicide missions. Started flying like he wanted to survive. Started eating properly. Sleeping more than 3 hours at a time. "You're saving my life," he told her one night. "You're saving mine," she replied. 3 weeks after they met, Semyon asked her to marry him. They were standing outside her barracks at 2 a.m., both scheduled to fly in 3 hours. The proposal wasn't romantic, wasn't traditional, was purely pragmatic. "If I die," he said, "I want to die belonging to someone. And if you die, I want you to die belonging to me, not the state, not the war. Me." Most women would have said no, would have recognized it for what it was. Two traumatized people trying to feel human through connection, trying to build meaning in a world designed to strip meaning away. Nadezhda said yes immediately. They got married November 15th, 1942. The ceremony lasted 7 minutes. No dress. She wore her uniform. No flowers. They were at the front, not a garden. No family. His parents were dead. Hers were unreachable behind shifting battle lines. Just them. 2 witnesses. A commissar who signed papers between coordinating artillery strikes. The reception was tea and black bread in the mess hall. Someone found vodka. They toasted survival, though nobody believed in it. Then Nadezhda flew 4 missions. Semyon flew 3 escort runs. They didn't see each other again until the next morning. That was marriage during war. Stolen minutes between death. Living in separate barracks because regulations didn't recognize that married pilots might want to sleep in the same room. Eating at different times because their schedules never aligned. Sometimes 3 days would pass without seeing each other, just knowing the other was out there somewhere, flying, fighting, maybe dying. But when they did see each other, even if just 5 minutes while their planes refueled, it mattered. The numbness receded slightly. The mechanical efficiency that kept them alive gave way to something resembling humanity. For 6 weeks, Nadezhda felt almost normal. Not happy. Happiness was impossible in war, but functional in a way that included emotion. She flew her missions with care for her own survival, stopped taking unnecessary risks, started planning for after the war. Semyon talked about the classroom he'd teach in, the books he'd assign, the students he'd inspire. Nadezhda talked about the bridges she'd design, the cities she'd help rebuild, the infrastructure that would replace everything the war destroyed. They knew it was fantasy, knew the odds, but the fantasy made survival feel worthwhile, made tomorrow something to aim for, instead of just another day to endure. February 15th, 1943, destroyed that fantasy completely. Semyon's mission was routine. Escort duty for a bomber group hitting German positions near Rostov. Standard operation. He'd flown hundreds of identical missions. His wingman came back alone. Nadezhda was preparing for her own night mission when she heard. Ran to the flight line. Found the wingman being debriefed. Hands shaking. Voice breaking. Eyes red. 3 Messerschmitts, he was saying, came out of clouds. I called warning, but Semyon was already engaging. Told me to run. I saw smoke, then nothing. I circled back. Couldn't find him. No parachute. No crash site. Nothing. Nadezhda stood there, listening, processing, waiting for emotion that didn't come. The commander approached her carefully. "Nadezhda, I'm sorry. We'll search. Send reconnaissance." "There's a chance." "There's no chance," she said. Voice flat, empty. He's dead. You don't know that. I know. I've seen it 50 times. You don't see a parachute. You don't find a crash site. They're dead. You just haven't admitted it yet. The commander looked uncomfortable. Take the night off. We can cover your missions. No, Nadezhda. I said no. She walked to her plane, climbed in, told her navigator to get ready. Are you sure you can fly? The navigator asked. Nadezhda looked at her. I've been flying on empty for months. This changes nothing. They flew 7 missions that night. 7 times Nadezhda dove into German fire with recklessness that terrified everyone watching. 7 times she pushed the plane past its limits, took approaches that should have killed her, survived through skill or luck or the universe's cruel joke of keeping her alive when everyone she cared about died. 7 missions, and she came back every time. And each landing felt like punishment. For 2 weeks, she flew like someone trying to die, volunteered for every dangerous mission, took risks no sane pilot would take, made herself a target, and survived every single time. It was obscene. Irina had died being careful. Zhenya had died following procedure. Semyon had died doing routine escort. But Nadezhda, actively courting death, kept surviving. The injustice of it broke something in her that hadn't been broken before. The numbness deepened, hardened, became permanent. They never found Semyon's body, never confirmed the kill. He just disappeared into the void that swallowed millions. One more name on an impossibly long list of the dead. They gave Nadezhda his personal effects. A small box containing his wedding ring, a photograph of them from the ceremony, 3 letters he'd written but never sent. She read the letters once, filed them away in memory, so complete she could recite them decades later, then locked them in her trunk and never looked again. But the ring, his wedding ring, she wore on a chain around her neck, under her uniform, against her skin, close to her heart, because she couldn't keep him anywhere else. She wore it for the rest of the war, for the rest of her life, 70 years. Even after she remarried, another pilot, another survivor, another broken person trying to build something from pieces, she kept Semyon's ring, wore it when she flew Mission 200, Mission 400, Mission 852, wore it when they finally gave her Hero of the Soviet Union after the war ended, wore it when she taught young pilots who'd never seen combat, wore it when she woke up screaming from nightmares about planes falling, wore it when she was 70, 80, 90 years old, and the nightmares still hadn't stopped, because Semyon had been right. If you died during war, you should die belonging to someone, not the state, not history, someone. And even though he was gone, even though 70 years passed, even though she built a life and raised a son and survived long past any reasonable expectation, he still belonged to her, and she still belonged to him. And the ring was proof that for 6 weeks in the winter of 1942, 2 broken people had made each other almost whole, before the war took that away too. September 22nd, 1943. Nadezhda Popova completed her 500th combat mission, 500. A number so absurd it stopped registering as real, just digits, abstract mathematics applied to horror. For context, British bomber crews were rotated out after 30 missions, American crews after 25. The military psychologists had determined that beyond those numbers, combat effectiveness deteriorated. Trauma accumulated faster than anyone could process. You became a liability to yourself, to your crew, to the mission. Nadezhda had flown 500. She landed that morning at 04:47, shut down the engine, sat in the cockpit for 10 minutes, unable to remember the mission she'd just completed, unable to separate it from the 499 before it. They'd all blurred together into one endless flight through fire that never ended. Her navigator had to help her out. Her legs wouldn't work properly, not from injury, from exhaustion so complete it bypassed physical and went straight to neurological, her body forgetting how to function because function was the only thing it had been doing for 2 years straight. Major Bershanskaya was waiting at the flight line. Something in her expression was different. Not quite a smile, but close, something almost resembling hope. Nadezhda, I'm nominating you for Hero of the Soviet Union, she said. The words took several seconds to process, to translate from sound into meaning. Hero of the Soviet Union, the Golden Star, the highest honor the motherland could bestow, given to soldiers who'd shown exceptional courage, who'd accomplished extraordinary things. Nadezhda felt nothing, no pride, no excitement, no sense of validation, just mild curiosity about why it mattered. Why? She asked. Bershanskaya looked at her like she was insane. Why? Nadezhda, you've flown 500 missions. You've survived 11 aircraft shot out from under you. You've destroyed dozens of German positions. I've done my job, Nadezhda interrupted. Like everyone else. Not like everyone else. Most people are dead. You're not. That matters, but it didn't matter. Not to Nadezhda. Semyon was dead. Irina was dead. Zhenya was dead. 23 women from her regiment were dead. And she was alive, collecting numbers like they meant something. 500 missions didn't bring them back, didn't heal the trauma, didn't make the nightmares stop, didn't fill the void where her humanity used to be. Still, the nomination went forward, up the chain of command, through regiment, through division, through Air Force headquarters, and eventually to Moscow, to the committees that decided who deserved the Golden Star. Weeks passed, then months. Other nominations came back approved. Male pilots from other units, men who'd flown 100 missions, 120, 150. They'd get ceremonies, speeches, photographs with generals, their names in Pravda. One fighter pilot, Nadezhda heard about it through informal channels, received Hero of the Soviet Union after 76 missions and 15 confirmed kills. 76 missions. Nadezhda had flown 500. She kept flying. 520 missions, 540, 560. The number became meaningless, just counting. Still no word from Moscow. October, November, December 1943. Winter settling in, the war grinding on. German forces retreating slowly but retreating. The tide turning. Victory becoming imaginable, if not yet probable. Mission 600. Nadezhda marked it in her logbook. Felt nothing. Flew again that night. Finally, in late December, the answer came back. Denied. Major Bershanskaya called Nadezhda into her office. Looked physically ill, like she'd been ordered to execute a friend. They said no, Bershanskaya said quietly. Nadezhda stood there, waiting for anger or disappointment or something. The numbness held. Nothing penetrated. Did they say why? She asked. Bershanskaya hesitated. Then, with visible reluctance, officially, no explanation. Unofficially, I have contacts in Moscow. They heard things. Tell me. They said they need to be absolutely certain before awarding the title to women. That the standards must be higher because it sets a precedent. That if they give it to you after 500 missions, other women will expect it. And there are concerns about... She stopped. Struggled about making women too prominent in combat roles. The words hung there. Obvious, inevitable, expected. If Nadezhda was honest with herself, she'd flown 500 missions, had survived the unsurvivable, had done everything the motherland demanded and more. And it wasn't enough, because she was a woman. And exceptional women made people uncomfortable. Male pilots got Hero of the Soviet Union for being good at their jobs. Women had to be perfect, had to fly 6 times as many missions, had to prove themselves beyond any possible doubt. And even then, the answer might be no. Because precedent, because concerns, because standards. What did they give me? Nadezhda asked. Order of Alexander Nevsky. You're one of the first women to receive it. It's a significant honor, but not the Golden Star. No, not the Golden Star. Nadezhda nodded, turned to leave. Nadezhda, I'm sorry, Bershanskaya said. This is wrong. You earned it. You've earned it 20 times over. I'll keep pushing, keep nominating you. Eventually they'll give it to me when it's politically convenient, Nadezhda said. When the war's over and foreign journalists are watching, when they need to prove Soviet women are equal, they'll give it to me then, not because I earned it, because it serves a purpose. She walked out, went to her barracks, sat on her bunk, looked at the order of Alexander Nevsky that had arrived with the rejection. It was beautiful, significant, historic. She was genuinely one of the first women to receive it, but it wasn't the Golden Star. The other pilots heard. Word spread through the regiment within hours. Women who'd flown hundreds of missions, who'd lost friends, who'd survived impossible odds. They understood immediately what the rejection meant. It meant that no matter what they did, they'd always be measured differently, always be women first, soldiers second, always have to prove themselves beyond any standard applied to men. Some wanted to protest, write letters, make noise. Nadezhda stopped them. "It doesn't matter," she said. "How can you say that? They're treating you, treating all of us, like we're not real soldiers. We're not real soldiers," Nadezhda said. "We're propaganda, useful when convenient, invisible when not, fighting that won't change anything. It'll just make us difficult." And difficult women disappear. The bitterness in her voice was new, or maybe not new. Maybe it had been there since those 3 rejections in 1941, since the male instructors sabotaging their training, since flying in wooden planes while men got real bombers, since Semyon's death and the realization that the war took everything and gave back nothing. Maybe the rejection of Hero of the Soviet Union was just the final confirmation of what she'd always known. So Nadezhda kept flying, not for recognition, not for medals, not even for the motherland, really. She flew because stopping meant confronting what she'd become, what she'd lost, what the war had taken and would never return. Mission 620, 650, 700. More women from the 588th died. Katya, her original navigator, the one who'd survived those 18 missions, took a shell through the cockpit in September 1943. Died instantly. Nadezhda went to the funeral, stood dry-eyed, felt nothing, because she had no feelings left to give. Mission 750, 800. The war started ending. Slowly, the Germans retreating, Soviet forces pushing west, victory becoming inevitable instead of impossible. And then, in early 1945, something changed. The war was almost over. Allied forces closing in from the west, Soviets from the east, Berlin within reach, victory within sight. And suddenly, foreign journalists wanted stories. Western reporters curious about the legendary night witches, wanting proof of Soviet progressiveness, wanting to interview these women who'd supposedly flown combat missions. Suddenly, Moscow was very interested in Nadezhda Popova. The orders came down: prepare for ceremonies, for interviews, for recognition. The 588th Regiment would be decorated. Multiple pilots would receive Hero of the Soviet Union, a collective celebration, perfect for photographs, perfect for propaganda. Nadezhda was told to report to Moscow in May 1945. She'd completed 852 missions by then. 852 over 4 years of combat, more than any other night witch, more than almost any Soviet pilot, period. And now that the war was ending, now that cameras would be watching, now that it served the narrative, they were ready to give her the Golden Star. The ceremony was lavish, multiple women from the 588th receiving their awards simultaneously. A group recognition, efficient, photogenic, generals giving speeches about courage and equality, and the Soviet system that empowered women to achieve greatness. Nadezhda stood on that stage, felt the weight of the medal being pinned to her chest, heard the applause, saw the cameras flashing, and felt nothing but contempt. This wasn't recognition. This was theater. They weren't giving her the medal because she'd earned it. She'd earned it 401 missions ago when they said no. They were giving it because now it told the story they wanted told. She smiled when ordered to smile, said thank you when told to speak, posed for photographs that would appear in newspapers worldwide, proof of Soviet heroism and gender equality. Then she went home, put the medal in a drawer, didn't look at it for 10 years, because that Golden Star couldn't undo the rejection, couldn't erase the message she'd internalized over 4 years. You are not enough. You will never be enough. You are valuable only when convenient. The other women who received their stars that day felt differently, saw it as validation, as proof that their sacrifice mattered. Nadezhda knew better. She'd learned the real lesson. Heroism isn't about what you accomplish. It's about how well your accomplishments serve someone else's narrative. She'd flown 852 missions, had survived 11 aircraft losses, had watched 23 friends die, had lost her husband, had carried trauma that would follow her for decades. And when they finally recognized her, it wasn't for her, it was for them, for the story they wanted to tell about themselves. That was the real price of being a woman who refused to disappear. You could be exceptional, could accomplish the impossible, could prove yourself beyond any doubt, and they'd still only acknowledge you when it was convenient. The golden star sat in that drawer, beautiful, meaningless, a monument to recognition that came too late and meant too little. And Nadezhda Popova went back to her life, carrying the weight of 852 missions and one fundamental truth. The system that used you would never truly value you. It would celebrate you, decorate you, tell stories about you, but value you, acknowledge the real cost, give you what you'd earned when you'd earned it. No, never, not then, not ever. May 9th, 1945. The war in Europe ended. Nadezhda was 23 years old. She'd spent ages 19 through 23 learning to kill, to survive, to function while fundamentally broken. 4 years of her life consumed by war. 4 years that should have been university, career, love, building a future. Instead, 852 missions into fire. The celebrations started immediately. Soldiers drinking, crying, embracing. The impossible had happened. They'd survived. The Wehrmacht was defeated. The Nazis crushed. Victory. Nadezhda felt nothing. She stood outside her barracks while chaos erupted around her. Watched grown men weep with relief. Watched women dance. Watched people who'd been dead inside for years suddenly remember how to feel joy. She couldn't access it. The joy, the relief, the sense of ending. Because for her, nothing had ended. The missions stopped. The guns fell silent, but inside, the war continued, would always continue. A pilot from another regiment approached her, drunk, happy, alive in a way she envied. "We did it!" he shouted. "We fucking survived!" Nadezhda looked at him, 22 years old, maybe 100 missions, a veteran by normal standards, a beginner by hers. "Yes," she said quietly. "Some of us did." He didn't understand, kept celebrating, moved on to find someone who'd share his joy. Nadezhda walked away from the celebrations, found a quiet spot behind the maintenance hangar, sat down, stared at nothing. The silence was wrong. For 4 years there'd always been sound. Engines, explosions, gunfire, screaming. The absence of those sounds felt like pressure in her ears, like going deaf, like the world had emptied out and left only echo. Someone sat down beside her. She didn't need to look to know it was Major Bershanskaya. They sat in silence for several minutes. Two survivors who understood that survival wasn't victory when you'd lost everything that mattered. "What do we do now?" Nadezhda finally asked. "Live," Bershanskaya said. "Try to remember how. I don't know if I can. None of us do. But we have to try." The Soviet government had plans. Rebuild the country, return soldiers to civilian life, marry, have children, create the next generation, move forward, forget. But how do you forget 852 missions? How do you return to normal when normal disappeared 4 years ago and never came back? They were sent home, demobilized, given train tickets and small pensions and told to reintegrate into society, as if society still existed, as if the people returning were the same people who'd left. Nadezhda went back to flying, civilian aviation, the only thing she knew how to do, became a flight instructor, teaching young pilots the basics in safe aircraft that couldn't hurt them. It was surreal, teaching smooth approaches and textbook landings when she'd spent 4 years flying through fire with one hand while the other held her intestines together metaphorically, teaching emergency procedures to students who'd never experienced real emergency, who thought engine failure at 1,000 meters was crisis, when she'd glided dead stick from 400 meters while taking anti-aircraft fire. She was good at it, technically proficient, patient, but there was distance. A wall between her and everyone who hadn't been there, who didn't understand what she carried. Her students sensed it. The way she'd go completely still when a plane's engine misfired. The way certain sounds, backfires, fireworks, thunder, made her flinch imperceptibly. The way she'd sometimes stop mid-sentence, staring at something only she could see. "Comrade Popova, are you all right?" a student asked once. "Fine," she lied. "Watch your altitude, you're drifting." She met another survivor, another pilot. Semyon, same name as her first husband, which felt like cosmic cruelty. But this Semyon was gentle, understanding, also broken, also carrying trauma he couldn't articulate. They married in 1946, not out of love, not at first, out of recognition. Two damaged people who understood that healing might be impossible, but functioning together was better than suffering alone. They had a son in 1948. Nadezhda held him and felt terror she hadn't felt during the war, because now she had something to lose again. Now there was a future that mattered, a life beyond just existing. She loved him desperately, but there were moments, terrible moments she'd never admit, when she'd watch him sleep and feel overwhelming fear that the world would take him too. That loving anything was just setting yourself up for loss. The nightmares never stopped. Sometimes she was back in the cockpit, engine failing, ground rushing up. Sometimes she was watching Semyon's plane fall. Sometimes, worst of all, she was at the funerals. 23 funerals, burying friends who'd been 19, 20, 22 years old. She'd wake up gasping. Her husband would hold her, say nothing, because what could he say? He had the same nightmares, just different details, same trauma, different wrapping. The Soviet Union didn't talk about trauma, didn't have psychologists for veterans, didn't acknowledge that war broke people from the inside. You were supposed to be grateful, proud, strong. The great patriotic war had been won. Time to move forward, build communism, forget the cost. But Nadezhda couldn't forget. The cost was still there, compound interest on a debt that would never be paid. The 1950s were strange. Stalin died in 1953. Things that couldn't be said before could be whispered. The thaw, they called it. A slight easing of control, but not for the night witches, because admitting women had fought, really fought, not just supported, raised uncomfortable questions. If women could fly combat missions, why couldn't they hold political power? If they'd proven themselves equal in war, why weren't they equal in peace? So the narrative shifted. The night witches became a footnote, a curiosity. Did you know the Soviets had women pilots? Interesting. Mentioned briefly, then forgotten. Nadezhda watched her story disappear, watched younger generations learn about Stalingrad, Kursk, Berlin, without ever hearing about the women who'd bombed those positions night after night, watched male pilots with a fraction of her missions get their biographies written. She tried to speak about it once. 1959, at a veterans gathering, someone asked if women's contributions were adequately recognized. No, Nadezhda said. We flew more missions in worse aircraft, and we're remembered as a novelty, a fun fact, as if we didn't prove ourselves 852 times. Uncomfortable silence. Then someone changed the subject. The message was clear. Be grateful you're mentioned at all. Don't complain. Don't make us uncomfortable with your truth. Her medals sat in a drawer. The hero of the Soviet Union star that had come too late. The Order of Alexander Nevsky they'd given her instead of what she'd earned. 3 orders of the Red Banner. The Order of the Patriotic War. The Order of the Red Star. Metal and ribbon that weighed nothing and meant everything and changed nothing. Because what did those medals accomplish? Did they bring back the dead? Stop the nightmares? Make civilian life bearable? No. They were acknowledgement without action, recognition without reparation. Thank you for your sacrifice. Here's a shiny object. Now go away and don't complain. Nadezhda wore them at official events, kept them hidden otherwise, because wearing them invited questions she didn't want to answer. People saying, "Thank you for your service," like gratitude, could fill the void inside her. The 1960s brought change. The space race. Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman in space in 1963. Suddenly, Soviet women's achievements were valuable again, proof of socialist superiority. Someone remembered the night witches, started writing articles, producing documentaries, interviewing survivors. Nadezhda was in her 40s by then, still flying, instructing students who'd never see combat, still married, still raising her son, still carrying 852 missions of memory that refused to fade. The documentaries portrayed her as a hero, brave, inspiring. They showed photographs of young Nadezhda in uniform, showed her medals, made it look noble. They didn't show her at 3 a.m. waking up screaming, didn't show her on February 15th each year, drinking too much and staring at Semyon's photograph. Didn't show her at funerals for other night witches who'd survived the war only to die from stress-related illness, accidents, suicide. They showed the hero, never the human, never the cost. In 1965, a young journalist approached her, female, earnest, maybe 25. "I want to write about what it was really like," the journalist said. "Not the propaganda version. The truth." Nadezhda studied her. "You want the truth?" "Yes. The truth is, I was 19 and terrified every night for 4 years. The truth is, I watched my friends die and couldn't process it because I had to fly again in 3 hours. The truth is, I lost my husband and wanted to die but couldn't figure out how. The truth is, I'm 43 years old and I still can't sleep." "That truth?" The journalist stared. "Yes, exactly that." "Then you can't publish it, because that truth doesn't serve the motherland. That truth says war destroys people. That heroism is trauma, that we sent 19-year-old girls to die in wooden planes and called it equality. But people should know many things. They rarely do." The article never ran, or if it did, it was sanitized, turned into another inspiring story that missed the entire point. Nadezhda stopped giving interviews after that, withdrew into private life, teaching, flying, existing. The medals stayed in the drawer. The golden star that had come too late to mean anything. Proof that recognition is worthless when it's given for political convenience instead of earned merit. She'd flown 852 missions, had survived the unsurvivable, had lost everything that mattered, and when they finally acknowledged her, it wasn't for her, it was for their narrative, their story about Soviet equality that conveniently ignored how they'd rejected her after 441 missions. The medal was beautiful, historic, significant, and completely hollow. Because Nadezhda understood what nobody wanted to admit. The system that used you would never truly value you. It would decorate you when convenient, ignore you otherwise, and expect gratitude for the privilege of being exploited. That was the real lesson of the Golden Star. Not that she'd accomplished something extraordinary, but that extraordinary accomplishment meant nothing to people who saw you as a tool. The war had ended 20 years ago, but Nadezhda Popova was still fighting it, would always be fighting it, because the battles that mattered weren't against the Germans. They were against the memories that wouldn't fade, the trauma that wouldn't heal, the system that had used her and thanked her with medals that came too late and meant too little. That battle never ended, and there were no medals for winning it. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Nadezhda Popova was 69 years old. She'd outlived Stalin, outlived the system that had used her, outlived the ideology that had sent her to war, outlived most of the night witches, outlived any reasonable expectation of survival by 5 decades, and suddenly, people wanted to talk. Western historians discovered the night witches, not as propaganda, but as legitimate history. Women pilots flying combat missions in wooden biplanes. It sounded impossible, but the records existed. The photographs, the mission logs, the survivors. They came to interview her, Americans, British, Germans, which created a surreal cognitive dissonance. Germans who wanted to understand the Nachthexen their grandfathers had feared, who approached with respect instead of bullets. At first, Nadezhda refused. What was the point? The war had been over for 46 years. Everyone who mattered was dead. Her story wouldn't change anything, but her son convinced her. You've carried this alone for so long. Maybe it's time to share the weight. You can't share trauma, Nadezhda said. It's not divisible. You either carry it or you don't. Then maybe tell it, so it's not just locked inside you. In 1992, Nadezhda gave her first completely honest interview. No Soviet censors, no party officials controlling the message, no pressure to make war sound noble instead of nightmarish. Just her, a Russian journalist who'd grown up after the war, and 70 years of accumulated truth. What was it really like? The journalist asked. Nadezhda was quiet for a long time. Her hands, those same hands that had flown 852 missions, rested in her lap, shaking slightly. Age or memory, or both. Terrifying, she finally said. Every single time, people think you get used to fear. You don't. You just get better at functioning despite it. You learn to fly while your hands shake, to navigate while your mind screams, to drop bombs while certain you're about to die. But you kept flying, because stopping wasn't an option. If I didn't fly, someone else would. Maybe they'd die instead. So I kept going, and every time I survived, it felt like theft, like I was taking life someone else deserved more. The journalist pushed carefully. You lost your first husband during the war. Nadezhda's hand moved unconsciously to her chest. Under her blouse, Semyon's ring still hung on a chain. 49 years later. Would hang there until she died. Semyon, she said softly. We had 6 weeks. 6 weeks of almost happiness between missions. Then he disappeared. Shot down over Rostov. No body, no grave. Just gone. How did you cope? I didn't. I flew 7 missions that night, trying to die, trying to follow him, but I kept surviving, kept coming back, and surviving felt worse than dying would have. Did you ever process that grief? Nadezhda laughed, bitter and broken. No. I'm still carrying it. Still carrying all of them. 23 women from my regiment. I remember their names, their faces, their last words, what they wanted to do after the war. Zhenya wanted to be a ballerina. Irina made terrible jokes. Katya, my navigator, she wanted to teach children. What happened to Katya? She died. September 1943. Anti-aircraft shell through the cockpit. I wasn't with her that night. I was with someone else. And I survived again while she didn't. The interview continued for hours. Nadezhda talked about things she'd never said aloud. The 3 rejections in 1941, the wooden planes that shouldn't fly, the 18 missions in one night, the bullet hole in her helmet, the medal they refused to give her until it became politically convenient, the 68 years after the war spent waking up screaming. Do you regret it? The journalist finally asked. Would you do it again? Yes, Nadezhda said without hesitation. Because someone had to. Because if not me, some other 19-year-old girl. And maybe she wouldn't have survived. So yes, I'd do it again. But that doesn't mean it didn't cost everything. The interview was published, translated, spread internationally. Suddenly, people cared. Documentaries were made, books written. The Night Witches became known beyond Soviet borders. Nadezhda found herself invited to speak. Universities, historical societies, veteran gatherings, and she told them what nobody had wanted to hear during the Soviet era. That war isn't glorious, that heroism is trauma, that survival isn't victory when you spend the rest of your life carrying ghosts. Young women approached her after talks, called her inspiring, said she'd proven women could do anything. Nadezhda's response was always the same. I didn't prove women could do anything. I proved that when you give people impossible tasks in impossible conditions, some will survive. And survival isn't success. Learn from what we did. But don't romanticize it. Don't make our mistakes. Don't let anyone convince you that sacrifice equals honor. Some people didn't like that message, wanted simple inspiration, wanted women can be heroes too, without the messy reality of what heroism costs. But Nadezhda was done performing, done shaping her truth for others' comfort. She was in her 70s. Most people who could punish her honesty were dead. What did she have to lose? In 2005, a German documentary crew came to interview her. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Germans wanting to understand the woman who'd bombed their grandfathers. The director was respectful, careful. We're trying to tell the full story, all perspectives, including yours. Why? Nadezhda asked. Why does it matter now? Because people still glorify war, still think it's noble. Your story shows what war actually does to people. They filmed her over 3 days, showed her photographs from the war, pictures of young Nadezhda at 19, 20, 21, a stranger wearing her face. I don't recognize her, Nadezhda said, looking at a photo from 1942. That girl thought sacrifice mattered, thought the world would remember, thought there was meaning in suffering. The world is remembering now. 60 years too late. Most of us are dead. They showed her German archives, anti-aircraft crews describing the night witches, soldiers talking about fear of hearing those engines in darkness, the superstitions they'd developed. They were terrified of you, the director said. Good. We were terrified of them. Fear was the only language we shared. But the most powerful moment came when they showed her letters from German veterans, men who'd been on the receiving end of those bombing runs. One letter translated, I was 19, stationed near Rostov. The night witches came every night. We thought they were supernatural, because how could human beings do that? Fly those ancient planes into our guns night after night. When we found crashed ones, we were shocked. They were girls, like our sisters. It was the first time I understood we were all just children killing children. Nadezhda read it. Read it again. Hands trembling. He was 19, she whispered. Same age I was. And we were trying to kill each other because men we'd never met decided we should. She looked up at the camera, tears in her eyes for the first time in the entire interview. That's the real story. Not that women can be warriors. The real story is that war takes children and turns them into killers and calls it necessary. And the ones who survive carry that forever. All of us. Russian, German, everyone. We all carry the ghosts of who we were before. The documentary aired in 2006, won awards, reached millions. And for the first time, Nadezhda thought maybe telling the truth had mattered. But the nightmares didn't stop. At 84 years old, she still woke up screaming, still heard anti-aircraft fire that wasn't there, still saw Semyon's plane falling, still counted 852 missions, like a prayer or a curse. Her son asked her once, near the end, "Are you at peace?" "No," she said simply. "I don't think I ever will be. Peace requires letting go, and I can't let go of them. If I forget, who remembers? If I stop carrying them, they disappear. So I carry them, all 23, and Semyon, and every German soldier I killed, all 852 missions. I carry them until I die. That's too heavy for one person. Yes, but it's mine. I survived. They didn't. This is the price." She died on July 8th, 2013, 91 years old, in her sleep, peacefully. No anti-aircraft fire, no flames. No terror, just sleep that, for once, didn't come with nightmares. They buried her with full military honors, her medals displayed, the hero of the Soviet Union star polished and prominent on her chest. Hundreds attended, veterans, historians, politicians giving speeches about courage and sacrifice. All true, all missing the point, because the real story wasn't the 852 missions. It was the 68 years after. The decades nobody talks about. The long, slow battle against memories that wouldn't fade and trauma that wouldn't heal. That was the real heroism. Not flying into fire, but waking up every morning for 68 years and choosing to keep existing when existence was exhausting. When your brain still lived in 1943. When sleep meant nightmares and waking meant remembering. Nadezhda Popova fought 2 wars. The first lasted 4 years and involved Germans and bullets and wooden planes. The second lasted 68 years and involved memories and trauma, and the impossible task of being human after learning to be a machine. She won the first war. Everyone celebrated. She fought the second war alone. Nobody noticed. Both required superhuman strength. Both left scars that never healed. Both were acts of profound courage that we barely understand and rarely acknowledge. And when she finally died, when the Second War finally ended, she was still wearing Semyon's ring, still carrying the 23 names, still remembering every mission, because that's what they never tell you about heroes. That heroism doesn't end when the shooting stops. It echoes, it compounds, it follows you home and never leaves. And the real battle, the one that deserves recognition, medals, acknowledgement, is the one you fight every day for the rest of your life. Against memories, against trauma, against the person you had to become to survive. That battle, Nadezhda Popova fought for 68 years, and nobody gave medals for that. July 8th, 2013. Nadezhda Popova died peacefully in her sleep. She was 91 years old. She'd survived 852 combat missions. She'd survived 68 years of peacetime. And finally, she stopped surviving. The obituaries called her a hero, a legend, the most decorated night witch. They listed her medals, her missions, her achievements, used words like brave and pioneering and inspirational. They were all true, and they were all lies, because heroism isn't what they tell you. It's not glory or honor or noble sacrifice painted in patriotic colors. Heroism is a 19-year-old girl being told no 3 times and refusing to accept it. It's flying in a wooden plane that belongs in a museum against an enemy with every possible advantage. It's watching your friends die and climbing back into the cockpit anyway because someone has to, and if not you, then who? Heroism is surviving when you want to die, because dying would mean abandoning the living. It's carrying 23 names for 68 years, because if you forget them, they disappear completely. It's wearing your dead husband's ring for 70 years because he asked to belong to someone, and you promised he always would. Heroism is waking up screaming at 70, 80, 90 years old and still getting out of bed, still functioning, still existing in a world that moved on while you remained trapped in 1943. Watching flames and falling planes and empty eyes. That's the truth they never tell you about heroes, that the real battle isn't against the enemy, it's against the decades that follow, against memories that don't fade, against guilt that you survived when better people didn't, against the impossibility of explaining to anyone who wasn't there what it cost to come back. Nadezhda Popova fought that battle for 68 years. 68 years of nightmares, of sudden panic at sounds that reminded her of anti-aircraft fire, of anniversaries marking deaths instead of celebrations, of teaching young pilots while unable to explain why certain maneuvers made her hands shake. 68 years of carrying ghosts. In her final interview, conducted 3 months before her death, a journalist asked one last question. What would you tell young people today about war? Nadezhda was silent for a long time. Her hands, 91 years old, still shaking slightly, rested on the table between them. Those same hands that had flown 852 missions, that had gripped controls through terror and exhaustion and despair. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady, the voice of someone who'd spent a lifetime learning to function despite breaking. I would tell them that war doesn't end when the shooting stops, she said. It follows you home. It gets into your bones, your brain, your dreams. You'll be at a grocery store 30 years later, and a car will backfire, and suddenly you're 19 again, diving to avoid anti-aircraft fire. You'll see a photograph of an airplane and your stomach will drop. You'll wake up at 70 from the same nightmare you had at 23. She paused, took a breath, continued. I would tell them that medals don't heal trauma. Recognition doesn't bring back the dead. Being called a hero doesn't make you feel less broken. You can have every honor in the world and still wake up screaming, still see their faces, still wonder why you survived when they didn't. The journalist asked, "Would you tell them not to fight?" No, because sometimes fighting is necessary. The Nazis needed to be stopped. I'd make the same choice again, but I'd want them to know the real cost. Not the propaganda version where everyone who survives gets a happy ending. The real version, where you pay with pieces of your soul, where survival feels like theft, where you spend the rest of your life wondering if you're actually alive or if you died in 1943 and just haven't stopped moving yet. She looked directly at the camera, at viewers who would watch this after she was gone. "Heroism isn't glory," she said. "It's trauma you carry forever so others don't have to. It's sacrificing who you were so others can remain who they are. It's choosing to break so others stay whole. And when people thank you for your service with empty words, they don't understand what they're thanking you for. They think they're thanking you for courage. They should be thanking you for agreeing to carry permanent damage so they wouldn't have to." That was her final public statement. 3 months later, she died. They buried her with full military honors. Her uniform perfect, her medals polished, the hero of the Soviet Union star prominent on her chest. Hundreds attended. Veterans, government officials, historians, young people who'd learned about the night witches and wanted to pay respects. The speeches were beautiful, talked about courage, sacrifice, the debt owed to her generation. All true, all sincere, all missing the fundamental point. Because the real story of Nadezhda Popova isn't about the 852 missions, though those matter. It's not about the medals, though those acknowledge achievement. The real story is about cost, about what she paid for those missions, what she lost, what she carried, what was taken that could never be returned. It's about the girl who was rejected 3 times and forced her way in anyway, then paid for that defiance with 4 years of war and 68 years of aftermath. It's about the system that used her brilliance and courage and determination, then denied her recognition until it became politically convenient, that celebrated her sacrifice while ignoring her trauma, that turned her into propaganda while treating her as disposable. It's about the 23 women who died, who exist now only in records and memories, and the nightmares of those who survived them, who were 19, 20, 22 years old, who had dreams and futures and lives that ended in fire and metal and darkness. It's about Semyon, who had 6 weeks of almost happiness before disappearing into smoke, whose ring Nadezhda wore for 70 years because love during war is the cruelest gift. It gives you something precious to lose. It's about the 68 years after the guns stopped, the decades nobody celebrates, the long, grinding battle against memories and trauma and survivor's guilt, the daily choice to keep existing when existing meant carrying unbearable weight. And it's about the fundamental truth that we celebrate war heroes while refusing to acknowledge what we've actually done to them. We pin medals on their chests, build monuments, tell stories, say thank you for your service, but we don't acknowledge the real price, don't provide real support, don't understand that we've taken young people and broken them, not physically, where it shows, but internally, where it festers, and then expected them to just continue, move on, be normal, as if normal is possible after what they've experienced. Nadezhda Popova was 19 when she first tried to enlist. They told her no 3 times, told her women couldn't handle combat. That war was no place for her. She proved them wrong at a cost they never understood and never had to pay. She flew 852 missions in 4 years, then fought memories for 68 years. Both required extraordinary strength. Both left permanent scars. Both were battles worth acknowledging. But we only build monuments to the first one, only give medals for the combat. The real heroism, the decades of surviving your own survival, goes unrecognized, unacknowledged, unpaid. When Nadezhda died, the Night Witches lost one of their last surviving members. The living memory of what they did, what it really cost, died with her. Soon, all of them will be gone. and we'll be left with history books and documentaries and monuments that tell part of the truth but miss the essential core. That war destroys people from the inside out in ways that never fully heal, in ways that follow you for 70, 80, 90 years after the shooting stops. That's the legacy Nadezhda tried to share in those final interviews. Not that she was brave, though she was. Not that she accomplished extraordinary things, though she did. But that extraordinary accomplishment during war means carrying extraordinary trauma during peace. And we, as a society, as humans, as people who send others to fight, don't do nearly enough to acknowledge that, to support that, to understand what we've actually asked of our heroes. We give them medals that come too late, recognition that misses the point, gratitude that sounds hollow when you're waking up screaming 40 years later. Nadezhda Popova deserved better. They all deserved better. Better equipment, better recognition, better support, better acknowledgement of what we asked them to sacrifice. But she got what she got, survived anyway, carried forward anyway, told the truth anyway, even when it made people uncomfortable, and now she's gone. One more ghost added to the millions the war created. One more voice silenced. One more survivor who outlived her own survival. But the story remains. The truth remains. The cost remains. 852 missions over 4 years. 68 years of aftermath. One woman's refusal to let them be forgotten, even when remembering meant carrying unbearable weight. That's heroism. Not the kind that fits on monuments or in history books. The real kind. The kind that costs everything and gives back nothing except the knowledge that you did what needed doing, even when it destroyed you, even when nobody understood the price, even when the medals came too late and meant too little. Nadezhda Popova was a hero, not because she flew 852 missions, though that's what the records show. She was a hero because she survived those missions, then survived surviving them, then told the truth about what both cost. That's the real story. The one worth telling, the one worth remembering. The girl who refused to disappear, the woman who paid the price, the survivor who never escaped what she survived. Remember her, not as the legend, not as the decorated pilot in the photographs, as the person. The girl who was told no and refused to accept it. The woman who lost everything and kept going. The survivor who carried ghosts for 68 years because letting go meant letting them be forgotten. That's Nadezhda Popova. That's what heroism actually costs. That's the truth they never tell you. This is not a story about heroism the way you were taught to understand it. This is a story about endurance, about fear repeated until it becomes routine, and about a woman who paid the full price of war only to be quietly denied recognition when it mattered most. If this story is moving you, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is, because once you understand what she endured, you will never hear the word courage the same way again.